Hi, this is Joe Foderick for the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, and I'm honored to have Curtis Chandler with us tonight. Curtis was the 2011 Kansas Teacher of the Year, and tonight's discussion centers on gamification. So, Curtis, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you having me.
Hey, before we get started and I turn the reins over to you, I'm wondering, can you help us simplify the word gamification for the audience and how it applies specifically to the educational arena?
Well, absolutely. I can definitely give you my version. If you were to Google right now gamification in education, you're probably going to get different flavors, shall we say, the same way you'd get ice cream. And the way that I see it best applied is an example that we're actually going to use tonight, where you take what it is that games do, their mechanics, their dynamics, and then you begin to apply them into your own classroom. So I think the way that we can really illustrate this is if you get a chance, actually do it right now if you can. I want you to go to the Apple Store or just to your App Store for your phone or for your smart device and type in Hungry Shark Evolution and see if you can find that free app game. And what you'll do is that'll take a little while to download, but later on we'll use that as an example and also give you a little bit of homework about how you can begin to explore gamification. So in a nutshell, Joe, I guess if we looked at a game that's played very widely, such as this game, and began to break it down and said, and then started to say, what does this have to do with education? How could we start to drive human behavior and especially human learning using these same types of mechanics? That's really what we mean when we say gamification. So with that, Joe, at any point, if you want to jump in and chime in, by all means, we all value your opinion here as well, and you've got extensive knowledge and experience in gaming as well. So would you like me to begin, or would you like to ask me?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. And if for our audience, you have the opportunity to participate tonight, we love interactivity, and so down in the bottom corner, left-hand corner of your monitor, there's a place to do text entry down there, or you can raise your hand above your name. Just click the hand there, and that'll raise it, and either Sarah and I will chime in at the right time to feed some stuff back to Curtis. So with that said, Curtis, the floor is all yours.
All right, well, fantastic. Well, right now what I get to do is play with a variety of educators and students all around the country. Right now I'm working on something called Remarkable Chatter, where we pump out podcasts and professional development for free, and much of it focuses in gamification, game-based learning, and student engagement. So if you want to revisit these slides tonight, you're going to go to a website called Better Learning for Schools, and you'll know it's the right one because it's green, the color of pond water. And in Better Learning for Schools, you can look for tabs. Like on the right-hand side, there'll be this tab, actually a channel for all the podcasts that we're putting out right now that deal with gamification, engagement, and motivation as well. I'd also encourage you to follow me if you hear anything remotely interesting or anything that you'd like to follow up on. Follow me on Twitter at CurtisChandler6. It should be an easy handle to remember because, well, it's got a 6 after it. I don't know about the rest of you educators, but I sign up for things and I lose my password. And I've signed up for Twitter 5 times and lost my password 5 times. So on the 6th time, I finally did what good educators do, and that's write it down in the back of my hand. So again, if you want to revisit these slides, go to Better Learning for Schools. If you want to follow me at Twitter, you can go to @CurtisChandler6 and follow me on Twitter. Like we said before, if you haven't had a chance to do so already, please go to your App Store on your phone or your smart device and download Hungry Shark Evolution. I'll kind of get it started this way, that I get to play in a lot of different schools, and one thing that I notice is this, that it doesn't matter whose school you're in, what organization that you're representing, talking to, or giving a webinar for, we all seem to have the same concern. And that's how is it that we get students to learn better, more deeply, and how do we get them to retain and apply those skills. What we're really coming from is this. This is what we call the 20 and 40 rule, 20 years of research in game-based learning that's digital, looking at video games and how that could be used to drive human learning. You have about 40 years of learning about games in general. So games have been around longer than video games themselves, and that's kind of the 20-40 rule. But there's 40 years of research behind how games impact learning, and 20 years of that is in digital games. My biggest experiences are actually the closest to home. This is my family. Feel free to awe. 1, 2, 3, awe. Well, I have beautiful children and a wonderful wife, and they are actually who I consider my education consultants, because I watch them really closely, and it's interesting that these 4 boys have almost exactly the same genetic makeup, but they like things that are completely different. I have one son, this is his name, Cade, And kid likes to blow things up and cause mischief. He's into rocketry. He'll get a hold of old rocketry stuff and test that. He got a bunch of stuff from his science teacher that the science teacher was going to throw away because it was damaged. Began to troubleshoot that. And what he found real quick is it's not that hard to set up, but after a while you get bored with it. And what he started to do when he got bored was to fill the cone of the rocket incrementally with steel BBs. Now that might worry a lot of you. You might want to call social services at this point on my parenting skills. But for a kid, my kid, that one kid, that's what he likes to do. He likes to ask himself, what would happen if? He finds a challenge, then finds a new challenge, and likes to prototype and redesign things. And so eventually, after filling it up incrementally, it crashes. It's a failure. But to him, it's not a failure. It's a success. Then I have another son named Kaysen. And Kaysen could care less for rocketry or prototyping. What he really likes is competition. If it's competitive, he will do it. So if it's a spelling bee, a geography bee. He told me, I don't really care about geography or spelling, but if there's a competition, I'm going to enter. I have another boy who's completely into music. And it's interesting that you have these three boys. The fourth one I'm actually still trying to get to know, the baby. But these three boys so far, none of which like exactly the same thing. And so as a father and as an educator, I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. What is it that seems to engage them? And the one thing that we all have in common, be it my kids, your kids, my students or your students, is this notion of games. Games are now ubiquitous and universal, and they're permeating society. And the claim that we're going to make for the purpose of this discussion is that human beings are wired for two things, for learning and for playing. And I don't think any of us here this evening are going to argue with this, that human beings are wired for learning. But that we're wired for playing, sometimes that's a tougher sell when I visit with educators and administrators around the country. I'll just give you a quick example. Who can we use here? This is my son Cade. We'll focus on him real quick. Not too long ago, he asked me this question. We were driving in the car, and it looked like he was staring off into space, and he said, so what games did cavemen play? And as a father, I feel like I need to have an answer for everything. And so I told him, I have no idea, but that'd be a fun thing to find out. And we started to do some searching on Google Scholar, and what we came across very quickly was something called games that ancient man played. Now this research came out in about 2012, and you have archaeological researchers and anthropologists that were uncovering these shell mounds down in Mesoamerica. And what they found is they uncovered these 1,000-year-old mounds from ancient man were these. In the mud, you had these indentations that looked to be random, like things maybe that someone had put a pole in it to hang something out to dry or so on and so forth. But what they actually discovered was that these holes, this odd shape, was actually a game, one of many games played by ancient man. So you can kind of picture a chase game where the point is to roll the dice or some version of a dice and to chase around, and the winner would win the same way we'd gamble in Vegas or something like that. So think of a game like Sorry, a chase game, or a game that my kids like to play, something we call here in the Midwest Dirty Marbles. But it's the same thing. We chase each other around, and the first one to complete it wins. Now, that's actually where this graphic comes from. The games are so simple that even ancient man or a caveman could do it. But it also seems to illustrate a point that as long as we've been men and women on this planet, we have played games. And so that's the claim we're going to make, that if we blur the lines between learning and playing, we tap into one of our most primal and basic needs. Hey, Joe, anything to chime in at this point? You're sounding pretty pensive over there.
No, I'm just really excited to find out that we've done an exhaustive study of this over time, and we have found out that gameplay is a really important piece. And I look forward to seeing how this transcends into the educational environment and how, the big deal is today we have to measure everything, how we can use this to measure success, how we can particularly maybe predict success or failure for kids, and then use it to also find ways to meet specific needs of the children. But I know that's coming later.
Well, fantastic. I think that's something we can jump right into, this idea that games are a way to assess both formatively and summatively, but they're also a means to an end, that they can enhance the learning that it takes to get to any sort of traditional or non-traditional assessment. Let's give an example. I'm not going to play this video for you. I'd actually like you to do this right now. If you've got another tab open or on another device, type in YouTube and then type in Ellen Plays Heads Up. I'll give you about a minute to do that. Go to YouTube on any of your devices, or even this device that you're on right now, and then type in YouTube Ellen Plays Heads Up. and we'll get back in about 60 seconds. Now let's pretend 60 seconds actually lapsed, since we're into kind of a time crunch. You can continue to play that in the background. What you'll find is, when I was a kid, this was the queen of daytime television, Oprah. And Oprah would tell us what things to buy, as well as what books to read. The new queen of daytime television is actually Ellen DeGeneres. And Ellen has her own staff that designs and promotes games, apps, often in app form, games like Heads Up. And so when you have the queen of daytime television saying, this is what we should be doing, it kind of illustrates a point that it is in our culture. The real challenge is, can we use it in schools? So this game called Heads Up that Ellen is using is just for fun. But you can find a free version on virtually any device called Charades. And I like the Charades version because, one, it's free for educators, and two, it allows you to add a category for your own vocabulary. So you download Charades and you find the button that says Custom. And you click on Custom, and you can add in words where you can play a charades-type game, where one student or a teacher holds it above their head, somebody else acts it out, or they can circumlocute around it, and they review the vocabulary, or they can actually demonstrate how well they know that vocabulary. In other words, one thing we can do in education is take very popular games, inexpensive, and in this case, free, and morph them for uses in our classroom. Virtually any teacher has content-specific vocabulary that need to be mastered. So level 1 would be a teacher modding or adapting a game like this for their classroom. Level 2, even better, would be when the students are choosing the words and actually designing the games that can and should be used in classrooms. You also see this with a tool like Kahoot. And so what I'd like you to do, folks, this might actually work via webinar, so let's give this a try here. I would like you to go to You're going to go to kahoot.it on your device, and on screen you can see you need to go to kahoot.it, and it'll ask you for a code. You're going to type in 20400, 20400. We'll let a couple of you log in, and then we'll carry on here. Actually, in the interest of time, I'll probably talk in the background. Again, you're going to go to kahoot.it and then type in 20400. And what this allows you to do is to gamify anything in your classroom. Basically, it takes the ew out of review. As I've gone from school to school, this is a tool that's used widely by teachers, but also by students as they're creating their own reviews. So you can drop questions in here.
Is this a free service or a paid service?
Oh, absolutely free. Yeah, there's no way that I'm going to show you anything that's paid at this point. And I think that might also contribute to the popularity. This is a tool that anybody can use virtually anywhere. And so you can drop your questions in here, you can drop video clips and ask questions in a gamified format. So we have a couple people playing right now, and this is how it works. I'm going to hit start. The first thing you see is if you load up an image, it'll blow it up really, really big, so be advised about that. And the question is, what technology permitted Curtis to create a soundtrack for his 6th grade girlfriend? And on your screen, you have these to choose from. So you can see the answers are rolling in here. And what this does is it simplifies the student's ability to respond. Okay? Now it tells me real quick the correct answer. Curtis created a soundtrack for his 6th grade girlfriend using a cassette tape. You notice you can also add images for clues or make those part of the question. And then when I click next, it has a leaderboard. It says at the top, for whoever logged in is fun, gets 775 points, followed by Joe, followed by WD. And your screen tells you as well how far behind you are on the next person. Now what this is an example of a tool that can be used to gamify just about anything, taking the ew out of review, an example of what we call gamification. It's a free tool and easy to morph quizzes right into something like that. Now you wonder why this works with kids. That's my question. I roll into classrooms and you'll hear kids say, can we Kahoot today? They're using it as a verb, and the teacher's thinking, well, suckers, we're getting them to review and to do some really mundane stuff. But the reason is this, something called expectancy value theory. Expectancy value theory is based on this, expectancy and value. No surprise there. But if you start to dig down, it means this. Expectancy is based on a player's ability. Kids are more likely to engage and persist in a difficult learning task if they expect to do well, if they feel they have the ability to do that. Now, when it comes to games, kids expect to do well on games because they enjoy playing games rather than doing traditional types of learning, for the most part. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. But expectancy value is also based on value. Do students really believe that there's a direct or indirect benefit to the task that's being performed? Now, while there are exceptions to this as well, kids greatly value the opportunity to play. It's something that is in our DNA, as ancient man kind of showed us that. So that might be one reason why games work so well in a classroom. Kids expect to do well, and they value the experience of being able to play with the concepts that are being taught.
Curtis, can I interrupt you there? Because I know as a designer myself, one of the things when we were working with the programmers, we spent a lot of time talking about was how hard a game should be, because you want to make it challenging while at the same time making sure that the player finds success. The worst thing about a game is one that's too easy, and on the flip side, one that's too hard. And if it's too hard, you're going to stop playing. So as you're designing, whether you're using Kahoot or other tools out there, what are things that you can do to help challenge the child, whether it's for review or it's a deeper engagement activity, but at the same time make sure that it's easy enough for them to get through so that they want to continue on playing?
I think that is the real challenge. One of the things that makes games so ubiquitous is there are now so many different types of games that cater to so many different types of gamers. And so while there is a movement towards customization and personalization of learning, when we apply those principles in the classroom, I think we're really going to be able to customize to the learner the same way that games are able to cater to students. It's likely that everybody attending this webinar here tonight has some game that they play fairly regularly on their phone or their smart device. But chances are we're not playing the same game. Because there's so many choices in the types of games, we're more likely to engage with that particular type of game. And so I don't know if I have an answer rather than I can affirm that. That is the real challenge is, do games work for all kids? No, but they work for more kids. But even when the game engages a young man or young woman, if it's too easy, yeah, they're going to quit. If it's too difficult, they're going to quit as well. And so it really goes back to that. Can teachers start to design games the same way that games designers do? And I think that's more of a question than an answer that I have for you. But I would think this would be something for the educators who are on the phone that you want to think about when you are designing review pieces or deeper engagement pieces. Is, in a game, you're going to hit the help menu to get help. What can you do to provide help for your students instructionally as you're preparing them for the days that they're going to use this, and as helps on the day that they're using games for review? I think those are things that are really important. This may be new for people who are doing this, but it's what keeps people wanting to come back and play more. Agreed. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. You can see this example like in music. I would be terrified to be up on stage drumming, but it's amazing to watch a real drummer get up there and just jam and drive an entire crowd or group of people. But the reason why that drummer, he or her, is so successful at it, and I would be so helpless and pathetic, is because of this again. They expect to do well, and they value the experience. So the challenge is, does something like that really, really work in schools? Can you take an experience like drumming, where somebody works really, really hard because they expect to do well based on their own practice, and they value the experience, and then take away those drumsticks and put them in a school, right? So instead of up on stage, they're in the elementary school, the middle school, or the high school. And instead of drumsticks, they're using books and pencils, our traditional materials. Well, if you think about it, we're using the same type of terminology. We call it expectancy value theory as researchers, but in schools, we're calling it rigor. We want it to be difficult and challenging, but not too challenging to where they're not successful, as Joe pointed out. When we talk about value, we're talking about relevance. We're using different terminology, but we're still talking about the same thing. How do we capitalize? Specifically, how do we use games to capitalize on the expectancy and value of students in that motivational construct? So one thing that we can do is we can start to use video games to teach. There are so many good games out there. There are also terrible games, but I'll give you an example of a really good one. This is at a site called iCivics. And at iCivics, you can find a game called Do I Have a Right? You and I have likely studied the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And in this case, a student actually gets to assume the role of someone running a law firm, and they get to visit with people who come through the door and ask, have my constitutional rights been violated according to the Bill of Rights? And so they'll talk about the case, and then you start to assign them to different lawyers. So it'd be a lot of fun to play around with. This is also free online and also on smart devices. And why this is powerful is, one, because it's well designed. The graphics aren't that bad, and that is something to keep in mind. When you go to use a pre-made game with students, research says that students are very critical of games. And so just because it is a game, if it's not designed well, or even if the graphics are terrible, they're a little bit more likely to be turned off by that. So if we're going to use a game that's been pre-designed to teach some sort of concept or content, we want to look for something that allows them to explore and interact with what's being taught. And in this case, the kids get to assume the role of someone who's protecting somebody else's rights according to the Bill of Rights. It also gives them feedback about what parts of the Bill of Rights they need to study more in depth. It gives them just-in-time learning. Well, you don't seem to know what this is, so check out these materials. But also you want to keep in mind that we want to embed a game like this as part of other instructional activities. There is still room for direct instruction, for reading, for collaboration, as well as for discourse and interaction. So games work best when they're embedded in parts as a part of other types of instruction rather than just by itself. In other words, we want to supplement what's going on with games, but not to supplant good learning. Examples of this, you can use Minecraft or SimCity. These are well-designed games that kids are using. Now, if you've never played Minecraft, that's your other assignment, is to go and at least, in fact, do this right now. Go to YouTube as I'm talking and type in Minecraft original game trailer if you've never played Minecraft. If you have played Minecraft, chances are you've played it more than once, because it's well designed to the point that kids will go back again and again and again. It's a horizontal learning space, a mitigated environment where people can individually or collaboratively build virtually anything. So in schools, we've worked with schools to do something like this. One unit we worked on with other teachers is there's a collaborative unit between their history classes and between their language arts classes. And so the language arts class was covering heavily Animal Farm, those connections to allegory, and the whole history or social studies classes were looking at the communist regime, the backstory to it. So the component we added to that was, what if we allowed these students to get into Minecraft and assume the roles that are talked about in Animal Farm? Some were assigned to be the pigs that actually get to rule everything. Others were assigned to be the dogs that police everyone. Most of them were assigned these menial tasks. They got to live and experience our version of a communist society. So when their final exam came, they were the usual items, but also these short to longer essay items that allowed them to combine their experience from their social studies classes, their language arts classes, and how the game or the society played out inside that mitigated world. And that's a good way to do that, because in Minecraft, people aren't going to get hurt. You can establish rules. And they've since developed educational versions that can be employed with ease in classrooms as well. Joe, anything to add?
Well, actually, we're doing some really cool stuff with that. I'm going to post a video up here in just a second of Minecraft. I had some kids in senior language arts class that really were into gaming, and so they asked me this year in the media lit class if they could do a research paper on video games with the idea that they would build a Minecraft world, and they would write their paper on the walls of the video games and then develop a test center for other students to go through there and do things with. I was blown away with, one, how dedicated the kids were to the project, something that they would have spent maybe a couple of hours on. Collectively, they spent about 60 hours in the project outside of school, which was unheard of for that group of kids. Then I was blown away by the creativity, their ability to see 3D space and build things and use redstone and create a wiring system in there, things that several of those students may have struggled with, some higher level math in their math classes. They were doing it all with video games and Minecraft. I was blown away by it. And so the next step that we're working on right now is that same group of kids is they're creating a world in Minecraft that's going to be based around, it's kind of like an Indiana Jones style quest, and they will have a series of challenges in there, but the challenges are based on Common Core math, and they've developed test centers for kids to be able to go in and take tests, and as soon as the kid accomplishes the task, they'll have a test that'll pop up, and the results will be emailed back to the teacher. So there's going to be all type of measurement pieces there, but the student engagement and actually having to demonstrate and persist through mathematics, I think the field is open with Minecraft. It's just how far you want to stretch your mind. I did not have the technical skill to do it, by the way. I just have to be able to know how to teach my subject matter and then turn it over to the kids and let them create. And I'm going to tell you, they really like that role. And so I think we're just barely touching the tip of the iceberg with it.
I appreciate that, Joe. I think you bring up a really important point, and that is my students are much more comfortable with Minecraft than I am. I am not a gamer. I'd rather research and watch young people and old people like play games than play games myself. But it seems like there is room for that teacher, like you or I, it sounds like, who isn't as comfortable with the games as the kids are. Our role is still to teach, to lead, to facilitate, and to gradually turn that locus of control over to students. And so the way that I got into it, I'll share a quick story. Joe's going to share that video with you that allowed me to expedite to another part because he'll cover that. Is we were doing a project in language arts at the beginning of the year where we were researching fiction and nonfiction texts that were tied loosely and indirectly, or directly and indirectly to amusement parks. So excerpts from Charlotte's Web, articles about amusement park rides. In this particular city, there was a very popular carnival that rolled in and out of town. So the challenge at the beginning of the year in a language arts classroom was, do you think we could research and learn enough about amusement parks that we could actually build a scale model of an entire amusement park ride here at school? And they really got into that. So I was selecting the text. They were helping design some of the criteria for the assignments, but they actually wanted to build these rides out of whatever they had lying around at home, be it Legos, recyclables, food. They were making these incredible scale models of these ride ideas that they had of their own. So picture a Ferris wheel going around and around. One student developed one that spun until you got sick. That was the whole point of the ride. Another student designed a Ferris wheel that went underwater partially. So they had all these variations of old rides as well as some ideas for their own. We have students that come to us and say, we had students that came to us rather that said, can we build ours in Minecraft? And this was the first time that I heard of the game. Now, so at this point, it's a teacher's responsibility to do two things. One, to make sure there's an environment, a climate in a classroom where a student feels comfortable coming to you and saying, can I do things my own way? That's step one, is to foster that in your classroom. Step two is when you don't know what a tool is that a student's asking to request, to sit down with them and to ensure that they can use their tool to meet the requirements of the assignment. And also being willing to modify the criteria, because anytime a student asks, can I use my own tool, the answer is only yes. It's a heck yes, because that's a student who's taking initiative. So if a student is into Minecraft or whatever design type game they're into, we need to know just enough about it to help it meet the criteria for the assignments, but also have that conference with the student and say, this is what I expect of you. And I learned a lot about Minecraft that first year from that student, and as other students who heard they could build their rides in Minecraft as well. And it's incredible to watch, like you said, Joe, the time and the effort that they put into an assignment they likely would not have done had they done it on my terms. So it doesn't have to be
Minecraft. I agree. And one of the things I did over Christmas was I found a cheap Minecraft shirt walking through a store one day, and I didn't think very much of it. And so I a lot of times wear a T-shirt under a blazer. You know, it's just kind of a billboard for discussion. And I wore that one of my first days back at school. And as I was walking through the building, I couldn't believe the number of kids who were like, Mr. Fothery, you know Minecraft. And immediately started a new discussion. And what it's led me to now is, you know, there are a lot of opportunities to use those pieces. You've still got to figure out how it's meeting your needs and how you're reaching your standards and things, but it's definitely another tool in the box, I think, for educators to use. I have a question on here that popped up. Curtis Laurie passed on about, have you tried any of the Jason Project games? The students love the one where they assume the role of the ecologist to discover the shark, if the shark is affecting the monk seal population.
I have not. That's one I need to look into. Can we post that into the link box? That would be fantastic. I think this is cool that
Laurie, if you
there's
could do
so
that,
many
if you could
games
pop a
being
link in there for us, that would be great.
That would be awesome. Games for Change is one that I've played around with a lot, and it sounds like just based on that description, it seems to fall into those categories. I think we're in an era now where there's not an excuse to not just begin exploring. If I'm in language arts, if I'm in math, there has to be a game or a simulation out there that can help expedite this content delivery to my students, but also to help them explore and interact with that. Thank you. That's a wonderful idea, is to look into that game and see, you know, what makes it so successful. Absolutely. Hey, we're going to go on to a next suggestion right here. I think the next suggestion I'd have would be this. As a researcher, you and I, as educators, need to spend some time playing games. And what I would say is this: as you play games, you need to keep two hats on. You have your teacher hat, but also a game designer hat that you need to begin to develop. So you're going to be playing games, but also be looking at what is it about this game that gets a learner to engage and persist and complete a difficult learning task. Because once you and I can nail that down and begin to apply that into our class, begin to gamify the things that we need from students, the more likely we are to get them further along where they need to be. Now, the good news is that you can probably ask anybody, hey, what game do you play? And they'll pretend they don't play a game on their phone or their device, but eventually they'll fess up that they are playing something rather consistently, if not religiously. So the game I'd like you to try right now is this one. This is called Hungry Shark Evolution. I ask you to download it earlier on your device, and I'm going to give you about a minute to start loading that up in the background, and as it's going to take a little while to load up, and I'll start to talk around it. What this game does is it allows you to be a shark. You can control the way in which it's played. You have outstanding feedback that's given. You could know virtually nothing about sharks, and within a couple minutes you can identify what is your target goal, how you're going to get there, and the steps that you need to take along the way. So as we start to play this game, what you would do is you would start to keep a descriptive list that answers this question. How does this game get somebody to persist in a difficult learning task? Because that's what games really are. So we're going to pause for a little bit, give you a couple minutes to try and play around with this game. If you're unable to download it, you could also just go to YouTube and type in YouTube Hungry Shark Evolution Trailer. One more time. YouTube Hungry Shark Evolution Trailer. And you can see this game in action without actually playing it. But again, it'd be much more fun to play it, pause, keep a descriptive list, and then go back and play it a little bit more. So we'll give you a couple minutes to play around with this. All right, since this webinar is available retrospectively, you can always come back to it. You could probably pause it right there and play all you want. So in the interest of time, this is what we'd ask you to do, is to play, but again, play it like a game designer. Like, oh, this is what's going on, and then start to think, what does this have to do with my classroom? Wear two hats, your game designer hat and your educator hat. There are researchers like James G. over at Arizona State University, and he claims that video games are incredible, powerful learning machines, often better than the learning experiences that we're designing in our own classrooms. And he's actually identified at least 36 game principles that he says should, change my verbiage, must be applied in schools if we're going to engage today's learners. You have other individuals who work in the private sector like this is Seth Prebosh. He runs a company called Scavenger, SCVNGR, and basically uses 100 plus game dynamics to drive traffic, control behavior to people's companies. And he has a number of these that he can claim are being employed on you and I right now. I don't know how many of you have had the experience of Black Friday shopping. My wife and I, for whatever reason, enjoy this because a game dynamic is being used on us. It's called an appointment dynamic. We are told that if we show up 6 hours early and are the first couple people in line at a place like I don't know, Sears, for example, or Best Buy, that there will be a limited supply of things that only we can get. If you show up at a certain time, you can and will be rewarded for it. That's a game dynamic that's being used in society. So the real challenge is for us as educators to identify those game dynamics, those pieces that are used in games, those mechanics, those little components, and say, what does that have to do with our classroom and how can we employ those? Now, when I have a couple days with schools, I usually address all 7 of these. So we're not going to have time for that, but you can always come back to that slide. These are 7 that can be readily adapted in schools. And I know this because last year I was doing some research where we lined up the verbiage of game designers and the verbiage of meta-analysis in education. So in other words, if you go to like Marzano and Hattie, where they're bringing everybody's research together, they'll talk about the importance of feedback, effective feedback in schools. Now, in games, they talk about it as well. They need to provide meaningful feedback. Problem-based challenges is something that's referred to in game mechanics. In school, we actually call that problem-based learning. So we line up what the education research is saying and the game design research is saying, and sure enough, there are at least 7 things that always seem to coincide, and these are those 7. In the interest of time today, I think we're probably only going to talk about these 4 if we get that far. So let's start with the first one. The first one is fun, active, and immersive learning. The bottom line is that learning must be fun, active, and immersive, because that's what the games that kids are playing are. Here's another one for your playlist. For free, you want to go find Injustice, Injustice. This is a game whose graphics and interactivity are better than the 3D movies that I got to watch when I was a kid. In other words, games that kids are playing right now for free are better than the movies that I would save up all week to go see as a kid. These games are fun, active, and immersive. And you start to ask yourself, what could that look like in school? Well, if you start to ask yourself, how can I make this work in my classroom, you could come up with something like this. Look at examples of gamification, like in the Army. I grew up next to military bases my entire young life. When I was next to an Air Force base, you could hear jets flying overhead, F-16s most of the time. If I was next to an Army base, you could hear this thud, 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 these artillery cannons going off. But now, if you live next to a military base, as I happen to do right now, 90% of the time, folks, this is what you hear. That's right, absolutely nothing. The skies are quiet because almost all of their training are done in these simulators, where soldiers are trained in very realistic situations, mitigated spaces, where they can practice, 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 and no real damage is being done. Now, I don't have the capability to construct a simulation, but we did say you can go out and find a simulation. You can start typing in math simulations if you're a math instructor. Language arts simulations, you'll find those. But you can also say, even if I didn't have technology, can I make it fun, active, and immersive? Absolutely. It was about the last couple of weeks of school, I think this was last year, a couple of years ago, where my language arts class, I could feel that those students were having a hard time engaging. And so I started to ask myself, how can I make this more fun, active, and immersive? I knew that we needed some practice writing, particularly with descriptive writing, getting our ideas down on paper, and using figurative language. So we brought in this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a jar of pickled pig's feet. And we got to school about 30 minutes early, uncapped those bad boys, and set them inside the classroom so that aroma filled the room. And as students walked into that room, they started to gag immediately. And they said, oh, what is that smell? And I said, well, that is your assignment. I want you to sit down. You can poke it, prod it, smell it, do whatever you want. But whatever you do, don't put it in your mouth because you'll probably get sick. And guess what? One kid, at least, from every class did, you bet, popped it in his or her mouth. And so they're trying to figure out what the purpose of this is. Well, we're going to come up with a list in teams of all the examples of figurative language that you can come up with that describe these pickled pig's feet, the way they see, the way that they look, smell, touch, taste, sound, whatever it is that you can come up with. And it was amazing to see these kids engage with figurative language and descriptive writing at the end of the year. Now, what does that have to do with you? You do not have to buy pickled pig's feet. But if you and I resolve to make a change, we typically ask ourselves this in our classrooms: how can I get my students to learn this? When instead we should do what games do and start to ask ourselves, how can I get students to experience this? Even the most traditional of classrooms can become experiential experiences. Hey, Joe, questions, comments, concerns?
Well, as you're going through this, one of my thoughts is I love all the ideas from this. I've been doing it a long time. I know you have too, but we may have other people that are either on now or will be listening that this is their first go around with gamification. And I'm curious how you would recommend them getting started. Is there a forum out there where they can go get help and maybe they can throw ideas out that, they can start building a framework for things? They start with one lesson and kind of work their way up the ladder, so to speak. How would you encourage them to start this so that it's just not totally and completely overwhelming at once, and with the end goal in mind of making sure students are engaged in the learning process and that I have a way to be able to measure academic success?
Well, I think that was well timed, Joe. It was almost like we planned that. I think this might be the easiest jumping off point, where if we just start to design our lesson with this question: how can I make this realistic and authentic? So if I'm studying the Industrial Revolution and the assembly line, eventually a teacher might come up with something like, well, I know the content that I want to deliver. I can get that down on a worksheet pretty quick. But what if, in addition to that, we actually simulated an assembly line? And I saw a teacher do this with with Mr. Potato Heads. So he brought in little pieces and so on and so forth, and he had 2 different lines going. One were the master craftsmen, where each individual had to design a complete Mr. Potato Head based on the prototype. The other one was a line of assemblage, like an assembly line, and they had a race to see who could create the most Mr. Potato Heads that were true to the prototype model. And sure enough, the assembly line won. But then the assembly line said, well, we beat you, but if you look at it, ours really aren't as good a quality. We've got a nose in the wrong place and so on and so forth. So there's an example of a teacher can design a brief simulation using no technology at all. As far as a framework for starting to design games, I think if we start to play games, we're going to see those dynamics repeated again and again. But one that's not articulated right here in this list, hopefully is implied, is that we need to establish very clearly what the learning goal is. And I believe the next step from there is to try and orchestrate some sort of problem-based challenge around that. Then from there, it seems to be whatever game dynamics or whatever steps seem to contribute to that. So while there are some game dynamics that are universal, my own recommendation would be a clearly established learning goal and then some sort of problem-based challenge to that. Not all game designers design it this way, but that's often how it is designed. Once you establish the problem, what is the problem that to be solved? That allows them to hone in on particular game dynamics. Let's check our time here. I think we're doing okay. All right, we gave an example of a simulation already, so we will skip that. So again, that question is, how do I get my students to learn this? Instead, we want to move our own instruction to this. How can I get my students to experience that? That's fun, active, and immersive learning. See, let's give you another example here of a game mechanic that could be employed in classrooms. This one's commonly referred to as customization. Another one is called co-design. We're going to combine these two in the interest of time. They're not synonymous, but they're in the same ballpark, so we can use them together. So again, customization and co-design. I'll give you an example. I had students a while back who were playing this game religiously. This was Tony Hawk's Underground. And the graphics were pretty good. It's about skateboarding, but many of these students had no interest in skateboarding, but they loved this game. And come to find out, this is one of the first games that actually came with the ability to modify the game itself. You could create your own moves, your own characters, even design your own worlds. This is an example of the ability to co-design or to customize a game. And if you look at games, this is something that's being used pretty readily. When you play Minecraft, you can actually play as anybody or anything that you want. You can change your skins. There are apps for a couple bucks that allow you to design your own skins. So you can play as your teacher down here or as a stormtrooper. You can play it however or as whoever you want. You can also modify the controls, like on the computerized version of Minecraft as well as on Xbox. You can play it in hostile mode, where at nighttime the zombies and other creatures come out to test the fortitude of your creations. Or you can play it in creative mode with unlimited resources, the ability to fly around and so on and so forth. In other words, the goal is to build, but the terms are set by you. I had a student come to me after we had read The Most Dangerous Game, kind of a creepy story around the time of Halloween, where carnage was abundant in many of the stories that we're reading. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Chandler, I brought you something." Now, usually when a student in middle school says that to you, you take a step back because you're wondering if they're about to hand you a poisonous apple or something like that. But he handed me a flash drive, and on it was this Minecraft world that he had developed, where he created a world based on the game, and I had to play the game to get out of it. So I spawned in this tower, and immediately was surrounded by monsters and so on and so forth. Had to fight my way out and then escape off the island, much like was done in the book. And you start to ask yourself, what sort of higher level skills are being adapted? He has to read and identify key content. He has to synthesize those details together. He has to lay those out in a 3D environment, make all sorts of modifications, and package that in a way that he can give that to somebody else. There's a young man who took the opportunity to customize his own learning. Now, that's something we stumble upon every now and then, but what we really want to do is be more systematic and strategic about that. So what could that really look like at school?
Curtis, I'll tell you too, from my perspective, we had a student, again, using Minecraft this year, and they were writing stories, and they're working on it right now, and I have a young lady, senior in the writing class, tremendous young writer, and she has put together an 88-page fictional piece on why Roanoke disappeared. And they've recreated the whole island of Roanoke, and now they've built their characters in Minecraft, and they're posing them and doing different things in there, and they're taking screenshots, and by the end of the year, her team will have a published book that they're going to have to be able to take home with them that we're sending off to a printer down in Savannah to do. And, I would never get that level of engagement just using Word. They are able to create at another level there. Like I say, they're seeing it in XYZ, and they're being able to create stuff in a very easy way. That's what I like about Minecraft. It's very user-friendly, and it enables them to make these massive environments, and their imagination just comes to life, and it's made the writing easier. So I can really see this working really well in a language arts classroom, a math classroom, social studies, science. It's just taking the time to sit down and dream and talk to your students about it. That's where I spend most of my time, dreaming up ideas with them and letting them say, well, what if? And boy, you just seem to go another direction with that.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm trying to be a little more strategic and systematic in the classrooms that I'm working with right now. And instead of just hoping that a kid comes to me and says, can I do it my own way? It seems like if we have two pretty good options that are supposed to be a little fun, immersive, and active, but also always open it up and say, but I'd also be interested in how you would like to go about this assignment. How would you like to pursue it? I think we're opening ourselves and our classrooms and our students' learning up to the opening up more to the ability to customize and co-design alongside with it. You can be on the hunt for tools that help you to do this. Tools like, these are all free tools or have free versions. News ELA allows you as the teacher to customize texts, nonfiction text on current events to different lexile levels with the click of a button. That might be a good tool. You can also find tools like Actively Learn, accessible via mobile devices as well, where kids can go in and plug in their own questions. You can add in questions. You can add in video clips if they need them. In other words, you provide enough tools that kids can learn more if they want to. But you don't need technology to do this. You can start to employ game dynamics and game mechanics without any sort of technology at all. What I'd like you to do is find a teeny tiny Kansas town. I want you to type in on Google, Exit Project Rock Creek High School. And what you'll find is an article from a place that's not too far where I'm at right now. And what they've done is they've said, this might be the most powerful game dynamic that we can and should employ in schools. In other words, there are 31 seniors last year who decided, for my final exams, okay, as my final project, I'm going to hone in on one thing I really want to learn a lot about and learn as much as I possibly can. I'm going to partner with a mentor from the community. We're going to put our heads together and decide what sort of problem are we going to solve, what the final project will look like, and how we will demonstrate that to a peer of individuals, to a panel of individuals in the community. And so you have, here's a young lady who was focusing on at-risk readers in her own community. Here's a young man who's partnering with an architect to get his original design in model marketing form. This is actually a young man and an older man that I met as well. This young man's name is Jerry, and this is John. And what they did is they decided they were going to restore an old motorcycle to the point where it could actually be turned around and sold to somebody else. In other words, they were able to choose the path that they wanted to pursue for their final project. So it's very likely after talking to these three, we're talking about, well, I'm going to go into some sort of mechanical engineering. I'm going to pursue education. I might go into architecture. But they also might say the opposite. I have no desire now to go into mechanical engineering or into architecture or into education. Allowing them to pursue their own path with structures and tutelage in place allows young people and old people alike to customize their learning. So leaving it open, say, maybe it's not about we decide the end product. Maybe we decide just the learning objectives and then involve those students, like Joe said, and what could the final project look like. And that's what we call customization and co-design. All right, we're going to cover one more dynamic in the interest of time. Go for it.
Yeah, and I would like to open it up for a few questions afterwards. So.
Okay, sounds good. Hey, one more that I'd really like you to pursue is this notion of feedback, improved feedback. Again, your homework is to go and play that game, Hungry Shark Evolution, and what you'll see is all sorts of feedback being used. Now, you can tell how much life you have left, what your energy boost is, how many coins you've accumulated, what level you're on, multiples, If you do something really cool, your time is ticking down, total points. You can also see there's a map that pops up that tells you where you are relative to other creatures. The feedback on this free game is incredible. It's one of the things that drives young people to play it again and again and again. And if we look at research, you see these same types of principles. Research says that feedback should be corrective, timely, specific to criteria, and even that students should be able to provide some of their own. And games do that. There's a reason why there's a Hungry Shark, a version 1, 2, 3, and 4, because as they design these games, game designers and app developers pay very close attention to the comments that are put and posted online. And what they do is they use those suggestions to customize or cater to, adapt, to change and improve that game for the next version. And teachers could definitely take lessons from that by ensuring that we seek to provide this type of feedback. And it's really unfortunate because in school, if you were to walk in to any school, chances are the majority of feedback you'd see would be something like this. We see grades or something leading up to grades. We see disciplinary action as feedback. And occasionally we see positive reinforcement or rewards. But games go so much further than that. If you look at that Hungry Shark Evolution game and keep playing, you're going to come up with a list like this. There's constant feedback. It's real time. You know exactly how you're doing in progress to your goal. You know how much life or energy you have left. We talked about location. You know how many supplies you have in your inventory in a game like Minecraft. But you also get to see how other players are doing. So we don't need to do all of these to improve the feedback that we give to students, but we could hone in on a few of these and say, how can I improve the feedback that I give my students? So when we talk about gamification, you could also look at an example of something like Candy Crush. You talk to people who play Candy Crush, and they know exactly where they're at, where they want to get to, and how they're going to get there. So how do we do that in schools? One thing we can play around with are things like I don't know, progress or completion charts, rather than just the traditional grades. This is everything that you need to do, and this is where you're at. This is about what you have left to do. I've also experimented quite a bit with leaderboards, and some people have mixed feelings about these because it seems like a list of winners, and that makes everybody else losers. But here's just a little anecdotal pictorial evidence for you. This is the first time that I posted the leaderboard just outside my classroom. And you look at the faces of their students. They wanted to know how they were doing relative to other students. And if they weren't on the leaderboard, many of them came to me and said, okay, where am I at? What do I need to do to crack into that leaderboard? If you look at free apps and software that's selling amongst educators and being employed readily for free, you have things for free like Class Dojo, which allows teachers to pick a little icon for each of their students and select the criteria: good behavior, bad behavior, and contributing to class discussion, sharing with another student. They identify the criteria and they reward kids instantly based on whether or not they're fulfilling those criteria. You have upgraded versions of that same type of concept, something like SokiCom, where not only do you have these little icons, as you play the class game, as you do the things that the teacher expects of you, or better yet, the criteria that you sit down with the students and set, you can actually level up your avatar. So it's much like this Class Dojo activity or framework, but it's kind of an upgrade from that. And you say, well, where would they get that from? Well, people who are designing this for educators, often for free, are studying games like, I don't know, like World of Warcraft, where you start as a white knight. And then eventually you can accumulate status points and experience points and level up till you're, I don't know what this is, like a white knight, level 20 paladin something or other. Okay, but the idea is that you can level up. Even in language arts, which is very uncommon to have gamification in, you can do this. I remember when we were reading Romeo and Juliet, and they came up with the levels that students started at. So instead of just their normal assignments and grades, they had to level up by completing so many assignments at such and such proficiency. So they all started off as a manservant, or a person in charge of various duties around the home of the nobleman. Eventually they could level up to apothecary, a priest or pastor, friar, lady, and it went up and up and up. So this is the first 4 of about 12 levels. And it was amazing to see students wanting to know, okay, how many more points do I have before I become an apothecary? And I guarantee if you ask these students today what an apothecary is and does, especially in relation to Romeo and Juliet, they can articulate that. Because for a few days, they assumed the role of an apothecary. That was the level. And you can do it with any content area. You can identify in science levels. I worked around a guy who was doing this a lot better than I was. His students started off as primordial ooze. And then eventually they could level up to Dumbo Octopus, and eventually Mountain Gorilla. It was an AP biology class where kids were pumped up about what levels they were. And there are tools out there to help teachers do this. You can go to something called Badge Maker, and they have badges for you pre-made that you can just pick, and those become the badges that you give to students. Better yet, what if you and your students? What if your students were the ones who designed those badges? We're doing the same thing that's done in the military, the Boy Scouts. Same thing that's done in video games, which is awarding students and helping them see you have leveled up, this is where you're at, and this is where you need to go. So that's another tool called Badge Maker. Joe, we're about to run out of time. You want to interject here?
Yeah, well, that's why I'd like to open up to the group and see if there are any questions out there. So does anyone have a question?
Fantastic.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and go on. I would really encourage, Lori says she thinks she needs to start playing more games herself. And I really agree with that, Lori. I think we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg on it. It's a growing trend, and there are skeptics on one side of the fence who are saying there's no place in school for games and play. And, you know, those of us on the other sides of the fence, we see the engagement. We're starting to find ways to integrate them in the classrooms, I think, very successfully. And what I would love to see is more conversation about this so that we can start sharing best practices. I know for myself, and it looks like Josh has a question from above, so what question, Josh, did you have up here? So I'm siphoning back through. Can you talk a little bit about providing us just-in-time feedback during Minecraft projects? Can you elaborate just a little bit on that? And you can click the talk button up at the very top and pop in if you'd like. While Josh is typing there, it looks like, one of the things I was going to say, we started a castle project years ago. And when I was teaching the Middle Ages, and it's a tough time sometimes to get kids, especially back when we first started teaching the project, engaged in that time period because there weren't a lot of resources. And so I would design a mythical castle somewhere in Europe every semester, and the kids would have to write a very large research paper on it. But their eventual goal was to break into my castle. And the work those kids did on their research paper, and then they could bring that research paper and debate me in class about their strategy they would use to be able to get into the castle and the materials they had. It was so rich and so deep. And so, Lori, I just think there are a lot of paper and pencil things that we can do for kids. There are a lot of game pieces that are electronic pieces, but I think it starts with just playing the games, getting used to the mechanics. And then as far as Minecraft goes, if any of you guys are interested in that, feel free to email me at josephfather@gmail.com. We are doing a lot with that right now. Like I said, I think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on it. Real-time feedback usually comes from me sitting down and meeting with the students every day, setting real clear-cut goals as to where they're supposed to be. I have rubrics developed for them that articulates out what their mission is, while at the same time, provides feedback for me as to how their kids are doing. And then finally, at the very end, then they have a master project that they have to turn in for me for a grade piece on that. But Curtis, do you have anything else you'd like to add tonight? I'm really glad that you're on, and I think this has started the discussion that we want to come back to at some point next fall and maybe do a more detailed piece on how you would integrate this into a science classroom or a language arts classroom. But just final thoughts from yourself.
Well, I think my final thoughts would actually just be an assignment for everybody is to pick a game that you've heard people play regularly, or start with this one, that Hungry Shark Evolution, and do what Joe said, is to play some games and start to keep a list. Pay attention to those mechanics, those game dynamics that are being used, and then begin to ask yourself, what can I do in my classroom? The bottom line is that you and I need to strategically start to blur the lines between learning and playing. We know that as human beings, we are born to learn, but we are also born to play. And the more that we combine those two, the further that our classrooms are going to get. So again, I thank Instoy for allowing me to be part of this, and Joe, thank you for your help on this.
Well, hey, I appreciate you, and I think this inspires so many different learners from so many different areas, and whether they're the kid who's highly engaged and is just inquisitive and is there every day, to the student who's struggling, not only to find him or herself academically, but maybe socially. I had a student like that in the not too distant past who missed a lot of days. And when that student found out that Minecraft was a part of our environment, the child never missed and was there every day. And because we connected with him on something he was very interested in. And so I just think you as an educator continue to look for new ways to embrace technology and gamification and be able to integrate it into your classroom setting. But we thank Curtis for being on tonight. Instoy offers webinars on a regular basis. We hope that you guys continue to come back. You can find our webinars at nninstoy.org, and I appreciate you being on again tonight, Curtis.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Okay, everyone have a great evening. Look forward to catching up with you.